PTSD Making Me Crazy. The tragic event I am about to relive for you happened while I was serving as a highly qualified airborne infantryman assigned as a driver/bodyguard for our battalion XO in the 505th Airborne Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne, United States Army. I am still affected by that event to this very day. I had a scheduled dental appointment at Rhodes Dental Clinic, not far from my unit area of the 505th Airborne Infantry Regiment. As I waited for my name to be called, I looked through magazines while reading a few articles. When I heard my name called, I put my magazine down and walked in the direction of the voice calling my name as my spit-shined military boots professionally carried me forward. Following the dental specialists, I was seated in a dental chair as she hung the dental napkin around my neck, onto my chest. A few minutes later, the dentist arrived to sit down beside me. As he held up the x-rays between him and the light, he reached for the syringe to give me a shot of Novocaine. Next, he laid down the x-rays with his left hand while reaching for a paper napkin. He was grabbing my tongue with his left hand and napkin. He proceeded to move my tongue over to the right side of my mouth. I placed the syringe needle on the outside of my lower left jaw inside my mouth, just below my tooth. At the same time, the dental assistant used the dental mirror to pull my left cheek out of the way of the needle. As he said, "This may pinch a little." He pushed the needle into my flesh, just under the tooth I was to receive a filling in, injecting the Novocaine. Following the injection, and him lying the syringe down, he stood up, saying, "I'll be back in 5 minutes to see if it's numbing a little." Upon his return, he asked if I was feeling any numbness. I stated, I didn't feel any change at all. He then picked up the syringe, injecting me with Novocaine in the same spot once again. Walking out of the room, he repeated, "I will check on you in a few minutes." A few minutes went by before he came back in to ask if I felt any numbness. I stated that I felt no numbness at all. Again, for the third time, he injected the area with Novocaine, then left the room saying he would be back in a few minutes. When he returned, he sat down beside me to say, "Okay, let's get to work." At this time, I stated that it is still not numb. He looks at me saying, "Well, okay. I'll give you another shot, and this should be enough." Then again, after giving me the shot, he left the room. After about 10 minutes, he came into the room and says, "You should be numb now." I stated, "I feel no numbness at all." He then stated, "Well, okay. I'll give you one more, but that's it, no more. I can't give you more than 5. I was beginning to question what the problem might be. I'd already been sitting in that chair for over 40 minutes. I had never experienced this. Normally, 1 or 2 shots in the area, and I was numb for 6 or 7 hours. He stayed in the room this time, carrying on a conversation with the female dental specialists. After about 5 minutes, he turned to me saying, "Well, let's go ahead and get to work. If it's too much for you to bear, we will just have to stop, then reschedule you for a future visit. I'm running out of time. I need to get finished, so I can be ready for my next appointment." As he started to drill into my cavity, my hands became vice grips on the arms of the dental chair. It was hurting almost like hell. He stopped while looking into my eyes, stating, "Can you handle it?" I had waited 6 months for this dental appointment. I knew it would be 6 months before I could get back with another appointment. That's the way it was in the 82nd Airborne. Your lesser medical needs came last. Instantly, I knew that I was going to sit there bearing the pain while waiting for the numbness from the Novocaine to begin. That's the way government-run healthcare has always been. 6 months to get an appointment, then take what you can get, because it will take 6 months to get another appointment. I stated, yes, I can handle it. And I did bear it, painfully. As my white knuckles bore the strain of my life and death grip on the dental chair arms, they starved for blood flow. It seemed like forever and a day, but it only took 10 minutes to complete the drilling and placement of the filling. I was gratefully relieved once it was finally over. Need I say more? "Okay," he said, "you're all done." Getting up from the chair, I felt the tingle in my hands of the fresh oxygen, brought on by the new freedom of blood flow. Walking forward, I covered the distance back to my unit area. All that afternoon, through the night, up to the next morning's breakfast, the pain in my jaw never lessened. As I tried to open my mouth to place food onto my tongue, the muscles throughout my face and neck strained as if they were lifting a heavy weight. By the night of the second day, I was looking like a hamster or chipmunk, who had stuffed their cheeks full of nuts and berries that they were taking back to their hiding place, even as if I had a wad of chewing tobacco stuffed into the side of my mouth. This caused me to return to Rhodes Dental Clinic and walk in on the dentist as he was performing his duties with a patient. Looking at my swollen face, he stopped what he was doing. stood up, asked, "How long have you been like this?" I painfully stated that it had been increasingly worsening since I left his dental chair 2 days before. He stated that I needed penicillin and to wait right there. He would give me a prescription. While waiting, people began to stare in my direction, as if my face was gross to look at. Meanwhile, a sickening feeling was creeping into my consciousness and physical well-being as my jaw muscles became increasingly tighter. After receiving a bottle of penicillin with instructions on when and how to take it, I returned to my unit area, walked up the stairs to my third-floor room to lie on my bunk bed. The next morning, I was not able to open my mouth to eat. My lips would open still. I could not spread my jaw to separate my teeth. It was as if I had no control over my jaw muscles. They had a mind of their own, squeezing my jaws together tighter and tighter as the hours slowly moved along. Once again, I returned to the dental clinic, interrupting the dentist as he was working on a patient. Again, he was shocked to see me. Concerned, he stated that he would write me a profile so that I could have total bed rest, also that I should double up on my penicillin. This was welcome news, as I was becoming weaker because of my inability to open my mouth and consume needed nourishment, including the sorrow of my left cheeks, grossly enormous and painful growth, which was affecting my physical well-being. I went straight back to my bunk bed, falling asleep. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, I opened my eyes to find my room spinning about me. Attempting to get up, I fell to the floor to begin pulling my way over to the door. Weakly, I reached up, turned the door handle, and opened the door to slowly pull myself along the floor out into the hallway. Feebly, I inched my way along the floor toward the next door in the hallway. Barely conscious, I attempted to knock on the door. I could just slightly hear the sound of my knocking. I knew that my friend inside would not hear it and wake up. I concentrated on breathing, focusing on gathering my strength, and picking myself up on my left elbow. I knocked harder on the door. As strength left me quickly, I found myself unable to stay up on my left elbow. I continued to knock with my right fist while lying on my chest. As the door opened, all I could see before I was 2 bare feet. Even so, I repeated the words hospital, hospital, hospital through my clenched teeth. My friend leaned down toward me and rolled me onto my back. He then leaned further forward, looked into my eyes as my voice strained to push past my clamped teeth while I said, "Hospital." He quickly left, soon returning to help me stand to walk down the stairway and out to his car. As we drove through the streets of Fort Bragg, the fresh, cool morning air swirled around inside the car, refreshing my senses, giving me a little strength. Once at the hospital emergency room, he pushed the wheelchair up to me, stood behind it as I climbed in, and sat down. I was waiting for 45 minutes in the air-conditioned waiting room to see a doctor help me as I gathered strength. Once my name was called, my friend pushed me in the wheelchair, down the hallway, into a doctor's office. Once inside, the doctor began to examine me, asking many questions. After explaining as best I could, the doctor began writing on his clipboard, stating that he was going to give me a prescription for milk of magnesia because flushing out my intestines would help with the infection. I could not believe what he was saying, and I became frustrated. I pushed the issue of my dental visit at Rhodes Dental Clinic with no use. He was determined to give me milk of magnesia. Government-run health care. As my friend pushed me in the wheelchair down the hallway toward the pharmacy, I said to him through my unnaturally clenched teeth, "Stop, just stop. I want to go to the emergency dental wing of the hospital. I'm not going to take any milk of magnesia. That doctor is stupid." Sitting in a wheelchair being pushed around, combined with total frustration over the doctor's diagnosis and prescription of milk of magnesia, it helped me to gather enough strength to stand, walk down the hallways of the hospital, stop at each desk, to ask for directions to the emergency dental section. Once there, as my friend followed closely behind me, I walked up to the front desk and stated that I need help. With one look at my face, the dental specialist behind the counter said that I had for me to take a seat. A doctor would see me immediately. I do not remember the technical name she used. A few moments later, a doctor walked into the waiting room, calling my name. As I stood up, my friend stood with me. At the sight of my friend standing up to follow me, the doctor said, "That's okay. You'll be spending a few days here in the hospital. You can go back to your unit." I turned and tried to say thank you, as my friend raised his hands to stop my attempted verbal thank you, to say, "Anytime." Following the doctor, I walked into a room with a dental chair to sit down. He began to examine inside my mouth and ask questions. He then went on to say, "I'm going to admit you into the hospital. Tomorrow morning, we will operate." I stated thank you. I was very relieved that finally, Something was going to be done.
Then taken to a room and hooked up to an IV bag.
The next morning, I was given a glass of orange juice to drink, along with a clear cup of onion soup, then put into a wheelchair, pushed to the elevator, and on down to the hospital emergency dental surgical unit. After taking x-rays, the doctor examined the x-rays, then sat down beside me. Meanwhile, his assistant adjusted my IV, then placed a blue medical blanket on my chest and pinned it around my neck. The surgeon was a lieutenant colonel, a surgeon specializing in emergency dental surgery. His rank far exceeded my own. The funny thing about the military, they put the fear of God into you when it comes to the orders given by an officer. That should never be in government-run healthcare.
As he looked me in the eyes, he stated, "Do you drink alcohol?"
I answered him with, "I occasionally have a drink of Jack Daniels, bourbon mixed with Coke." He then said, "Well, this is going to feel like 10 shots of Jack Daniels and Coke," then injected into my IV a morphine cocktail.
As the morphine entered my arm, I instantly felt total bliss and stated,
When I awakened, the blue blanket on my chest was drenching wet with blood and saliva, while the doctor looked into my eyes and said, "It's all over. You'll be taken back to your room now. I'll check in on you later in the day." I stated, through my clenched teeth, "What happened?"
He went on to say that he had cut into my left jaw socket and placed a length of folded rubber so that the fluids that had filled up my left jaw socket could drain out freely.
Note, I had lockjaw from bad Novocaine, and he thought I had an abscessed tooth. Later that day, around 3 p.m., he came by my hospital bed and examined inside my mouth. He went on to say that it looks like the drain is going to stay in place. So I'm going to order that you be given 4 million units of penicillin by IV every 4 hours and 24 hours a day until further notice. 30 minutes later, a nurse arrived to change my IV with an equally sized bag of brown fluid, as the fluid ran down the tubes of the IV into my arm. The vein in my arm became extremely hot. An intense burning sensation followed through the entire vein, moving throughout my whole body. The burning sensation running through my veins was so intense that my eyes filled with tears. I lie there in my bed experiencing horrible misery. From time to time, a nurse came in to give me extra-strength Tylenol, with a small sip of water or juice. I was only able to swallow the Tylenol after forcing it alongside my cheek to the back of my mouth and around the back of my teeth onto the back of my tongue. Over the next 24-hour period, I received 4 million units of penicillin at exactly 4-hour intervals. During the times that the 4 million unit bag of penicillin had run dry, it was replaced with a clear medical IV solution until it was time for my next 4 million unit bag of penicillin. Early the next day, an unconscious patient on a medical bed was pushed into my room and up next to the wall. A car accident victim. He had just had a cast taken off of his foot, and his broken bone reset, then a new cast put back on it. About an hour later, when his morphine wore off, he began to wake up, moan loudly, painfully excruciating sounds that put the fear of hell into my mind. This was a horrific experience for me, for I was lying in pure misery myself. It did not take long before I was pressing on the button which summons a nurse. Once inside the room, she immediately understood the situation and then left once again. A few moments later, she and another nurse returned to my room and pushed the moaning man back out into the hallway. As time went by throughout the day, I received my 4 million unit bag of penicillin into my IV on a regular 4-hour basis. However, then again, the next day I awoke to find that my room had a second occupant. This time it was a young male soldier who was covered in bandages throughout his entire body. After he had awakened, we began to talk and tell each other about the circumstances leading up to our being in a hospital bed in serious condition. He went on to say that he had gone out with friends and stopped at a bar for a couple of drinks. Now, his friends tell him that the last time they saw him, he was walking outside with a woman that worked inside the bar. Further, he stated that when he was found, he was 2 blocks from the bar. Further, just as a train engineer saw him lying face first on the tracks, he had put on the brakes but was not able to stop the train before it ran over him. Also, that after the train had stopped, the engineer had gotten out and found him under the train bleeding profusely. Further, that his wallet was found 300 feet or so, near the train tracks, from where the train had stopped, clean of all money. It was back where the train had first hit him. Even that, if he had not been hooked and dragged by the train's underside, it would have cut him into pieces, killing him. This poor fellow had deep, wide chunks of his head, flesh and bone, wholly gone. Large portions of the muscles in his arms and legs had been completely ripped away. He explained that he had been there in the hospital for 4 weeks and that they needed the room he was in for a new patient.
This is why he was moved to my room for his continued recovery.
Each shift had a different nurse, each with different bedside manners. One was so kind, so understanding, it was as if she felt the pain and misery right along with me. Another was a dictator bent on making me get out of bed every morning at 5:30 a.m. to make my hospital bed. I disliked this type of disrespect and voiced my discontent,
which brought in the head nurse, who agreed with me and had that nurse transferred. This brought in a new nurse that came on shift at 4 o'clock in the morning.
She was a large woman, around 32 years of age, with short brown hair, weighing around 250 pounds. Because the 4 million units of penicillin, filling my veins and go into the socket of my jaw. It flushed out a dark black cruddy gook. It flushed out my jaw socket by carrying the dark black cruddy gook out through the folded rubber that was surgically implanted into the socket of my left jaw. This black gook filled my mouth with the most god-awful taste, which made me have to sleep lying on my left side,
allowing the gook to flow out of the corner of my mouth and onto a towel that I laid my head on when I fell asleep.
Because I was lying on my left side and my left arm was where the IV needle entered my vein. I slept with my arm straight out over the side of my hospital bed, poking out maybe 1 foot.
Nearly 7 days into the 4 million units of penicillin every 4 hours around the clock, I was lightly awakened around 4:30 a.m. by a slight pressure on my left middle finger. In my grogginess, it felt as if something was rubbing my finger, as my dream somehow searched for a way to include this.
I awakened to find this overweight nurse, lightly pressing and rubbing her vagina against my finger. Groggily I blinked my eyes, realizing that she did not know I was watching. She was not stopping.
As my head turned a little to the right so that I could look upward, my eyes opened wider and focused on her silhouette in the dim light.
She was slowly opening her eyes and focused her gaze on my face, realizing that I was awake. Instantly, her eyes opened very wide. She turned away and immediately left the room. I was disgusted and looked across the room toward the other bed.
I could see that the poor fellow who had been run over by the train was sound asleep. He had no idea what had been happening. I was not in a good mood and wanted to voice my opinion. With my right hand, I reached towards the button, which summons whoever was at the desk.
No one came.
So after about 45 minutes, I gathered up my physical strength as I had been weakened further from my illness and a daily cup of onion soup so that I could stand beside my bed.
Slowly, I used the rolling IV stand to support myself as I walked out into the hallway. As I looked left and then right, I could see no one. The hallway was empty.
I heard someone talking to my right. Walking in that direction, I was soon at the end of the hallway, standing in a doorway. As I entered, I could see that the room was 3 times the size of my room and had 6 or 7 hospital beds, each filled with a different man.
Sitting upon it in his bed, a man on the far right motioned for me to come over to him. As I walked up to him, he stated, "I've been pushing the button for the last 45 minutes, and nobody is coming. My IV is empty, and now my blood is running back into the tube." Hearing this, I stated that I had been pushing the button for the last 45 minutes myself and that maybe he should just cramp up the tube and keep the blood from flowing back into the IV bag. After a moment or two, we started getting acquainted, and as I explained, through my clenched teeth, how and why I was in the hospital. He claimed with wide open eyes that he was in the hospital for the same reason, even that he had come from Rhodes Dental Clinic. He went on to claim that 3 other men were in the room, and that they were there because of the same problem, and that one man was scheduled for a 7 a.m. operation. The surgeons were going to open his jaw and scrape out all of the bone marrow, because the infection was spreading wildly, and if they could not stop it, it may get into his brain. Looking at me with wide open eyes, he said, "It was bad Novocaine, and they're trying to cover it up." The next day when I visited him, he stated that the man had died last night, who had had the bone marrow scraped out of his jaw. It was too late. The infection had gotten into his brain and killed him. I did not like the obese woman who had used my middle finger to masturbate herself while I was sick and incapacitated. Eventually, I slowly forgot about her after she never returned. Over the next few days, I returned to talk to the man in the other room whenever I could. Then suddenly he was gone. Other patients in the room said that he had been released. A couple of days later ended my 4 million units of penicillin every 4 hours around the clock. So I was taken to surgery, where the rubber tube that had been surgically implanted in my left jaw socket was removed. By this time, it was a total of 2.5 weeks since I had gone to the dentist initially. So you can imagine that because I had only drunken juice and onion soup, including lying in bed 24 hours a day,
I had become fragile through this illness, to the extent of becoming exhausted after just short walks.
The following day the surgeon came by around 9 a.m. to examine me.
Then he went on to say that he was going to have some tongue depressors sent by the nurses,
and that I was to start with one and force them between my front teeth, upper and lower, and begin to pry my mouth apart. I do remember feeling a little excited that I was moving into the healing stage, as I hoped that I would soon be eating solid food again.
Once the tongue depressors arrived, a nurse tried to help me by taking a tongue depressor and forcing it in between my teeth. She could barely do it and soon left me to the task.
Slowly, hour by hour, I would push a tongue depressor between my front teeth and try to pry my mouth apart. After a couple of days, I could add a tongue depressor and have two tongue depressors, one stacked on top of the other, forced between my front teeth as I moved the outer portion of the tongue depressors up or down or tried to twist them in an effort of spreading my jaw apart. On the third day, the surgeon came by to examine me and had me demonstrate to him my exercises with the tongue depressors. He seemed concerned that I could only get two after 2 days, so I explained that each morning I had had to start over again with one because my mouth had hardened closed again while sleeping. Further, it was only until the afternoon of the second day that I could get two in place.
As he left, he stated that he would be by tomorrow and he wanted to see 4 tongue depressors stuck between my front teeth,
and that I was to start sleeping all night long with the tongue depressors in between my teeth, sticking out of my mouth. As time went by day, I could add one more tongue depressor stacked on top of the others in between my front teeth.
As you might imagine, when you get to 7, 8, 9, 10, and you have to sleep with 10 tongue depressors, stacked one on top of each other in your mouth, so that your mouth will not tighten back down overnight,
it leads to some very horrific nightmares.
By this time, the surgeon was getting aggravated each morning when he came by to see me, and I had only built up to where I could put 10 tongue depressors stacked on top of each other in between my front teeth. He was beginning to grind his teeth together when he listened to me explain the difficulties I was having. When he left the room that morning, he told me that he would return in 3 or 4 days, and that he expected me to have 17 tongue depressors stacked one on top of the other in between my front teeth, and that if I did not, I would not like what he was going to have to do. This was shocking, as I believed I was doing excellent. I was moving ahead steadily and could chew a little, even becoming more tolerant of sleeping with my mouth spread wide open with the tongue depressors jammed between my front teeth. 3 days later, when the surgeon came by in the morning to examine me, he said, "Okay, I see 17 tongue depressors stuck between your front teeth. Show me." I tried and could only get 14 stuck in between my front teeth. This angered him, and he went off, raising his voice at me, saying that when he came back by the next morning,
if I did not have 17 tongue depressors stuck between my front teeth, that he was going to take me downstairs to the dental office and put a mechanism called a dead heart into my mouth to spread my mouth apart.
Raising his voice one last time, he stated, "You will not like it."
The next morning when he showed up, I could only get 14 and half tongue depressors stuck in between the upper and lower front teeth of my mouth. He became instantly hostile and said, "All right, that's it. I told you what was going to happen. Now, you're going to see, and you're going to be sorry about it." I could not believe what I was hearing.
I had no comprehension as to why he was so angry.
I don't believe that I could get more than 14 tongue depressors in between my upper and lower front teeth before this whole tragic event ever took place. It just didn't make any sense.
I had truly been trying. I was ready to get up and get out of this hospital, get on with my life.
What is this man's problem? Gee. The next morning he came by my room personally, had me get dressed in my duty uniform, and into a wheelchair. He wheeled me to the elevator. We then rode downward. He pushed me down the hallway and into the dental clinic, past the front desk into a short hallway, and into a room with a dental chair. The entire time with a stern look in his eyes and on his face. Then he turned to face me, and with a loud thunderous voice, he exclaimed, "I told you what was going to happen. I warned you. Now you're going to see what I was talking about. You're going to be sorry that you did not listen to what I had to say.
I'm required by regulations to have your mouth open to a certain distance before I can legally let you out of the hospital."
You will leave the hospital today? Okay, I was thinking.
Let's get this done, so I can get out of here.
He turned and opened a drawer in the cabinet, pulling out a device that looked much like a pair of vice grips or pliers. However, on the tips, they had grooves for your teeth, which pointed outward in opposite directions, maybe 1/4 inch deep. In between the handles were what looked like slides with little grooves, much like a slide on a Jeep jack. That works by allowing a small lever to slip in between the grooves as it is spread wider and wider while locking it into place so that it could not close. Nevertheless, with this device of which he called a dead heart, the more he squeezed the handles together, the more the tips of the device spread apart. He walked over to me and put them into my mouth. Quickly, I adjusted it to where my teeth, upper and lower, were positioned exactly on the grooves at the tip of the device. Then with both hands, he grabbed the handles and squeezed tightly, wrenching my mouth apart as wide as it would go. My jaw was forced down onto my chest as I weakened from his body weight, leaning forward while he squeezed the device. With my eyes widely open and filled with tears, he stood back, looked at me, and said, "You take it, you take it. I'll be back in 10 minutes, don't you move." The first 10 minutes seemed like a long time, and I believe he actually waited 20 minutes. Even so, when he came into the room, he walked over to me and saw that my saliva was running down my mouth and chin. A big wet spot was forming on my shirt. He moved over to another drawer at the cabinet and pulled out a large towel the size of a beach towel. Placing it under my chin, he draped it along my body as if covering me with a blanket. He then grabbed the handles of the device again with both hands and attempted to spread it apart. Not being able to get it to click into the next, more open position, he climbed up on top of the dental chair, put one knee on each arm of the chair to position himself. Towering over me, he bent forward and grabbed the device handles with both hands, squeezing tighter and tighter as he said, "I told you, you are not going to like it." With his hands shaking and trembling from his exertion of strength to squeeze the handles of the device, the upper portion, on my front teeth, slipped forward into my mouth, off of my teeth, crashing into the roof portion of my mouth. The grooved part that was to hold my teeth in place or to hold the device in place on my teeth was now crushing into the roof of my mouth. I jolted underneath him, squirmed, wiggled, and moaned. Again he yelled, "You take it. You take it. I told you that you're not going to like it. Now you take it." Then as he could not squeeze any tighter on the handles of the dead heart, his knee slipped off of the right arm of the dental chair and hit me in my ribs, knocking the air out of me. This slight change in pressure allowed the device to click into place just a little wider. As he got down off of the chair, tears were running out of my eyes as I pointed into my mouth, trying to explain to him that the device had slipped off of my teeth and was crushing into the roof of my mouth. Surely, he would understand. I could not speak but pointed and moaned loudly. He stated that he did not want to hear any complaints from me. He had told me what was going to happen and what it was going to be like. He left the room. I was totally weakened. The 4 weeks while lying in the hospital bed with only onion soup for food had left me unable to fight back any further. All my strength had left me. I lay there with my mind in total shock, thinking that the next time he came into the room, he would understand my tears along with my finger pointing. Then make the adjustment. Soon, I saw black spots going in and out of unconsciousness. Every 10 to 15 minutes for the next 3 hours, he would return again. Each time I would try to explain to him by pointing into my mouth, up towards the roof of my mouth, in hopes that he would just look and see that the device had slipped off my teeth and was crushing into the flesh at the top of my mouth. He'd see that my saliva had completely drenched the beach towel. Further, the tears in my eyes were beyond what the device was supposed to do. Alternatively, what it was designed to do. Surely he would understand. Nevertheless, he never did. Each time he came in, he was angered and infuriated even further by my insisting that he follow in the direction of my index finger. Angry, he would climb up on top of the chair, several times having to put his knee into my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs as he squeezed the device, one click wider every 10 to 15 minutes. Many times I tried to free myself from the device. I just could not do it. Toward the end, he could not get it to click any further. At the end of 3.5 hours, I knew this because I was looking at a clock on the wall. I was absolutely exhausted, beyond compare. My body was drained of all energy. I was in and out of faint. I had no fight left in me. The excruciating pain, as the device was pressed into the flesh at the roof of my mouth, had now overwhelmed my thought process, to where I lay in total mental and physical shock. I no longer tried to resist and knew how a wild animal feels when they have had their leg caught in a metal trap with no way to escape. Again, he wanted to lecture me on how he had warned me and told me that I would not like it. As suddenly as it had begun, he climbed up on me, purposely putting his knee into my chest and pushing down one last time with his hands, arms, and shoulders. He was using so much of his strength his entire upper body trembled and shook. He did this to spread the dead heart apart one last time so that he could move the little lever, which locks it into place. Instantly it closed back together, and then he slipped it out of my mouth. As he got down off of my chest and my lungs filled with air, my eyes clouded with tears as my mouth slowly tried to relax, he turned to me and said loudly, "I don't want to hear it. I told you, I don't want to hear it. You knew what was going to happen. I told you that you were not going to like it. You stop that crying. I don't want to hear it." I could not control my crying and continued to point into the roof of my mouth. With a whimpering voice, I said, "I only wanted to tell you that it had slipped off of my teeth and was crushing into the top inside of my mouth. I only wanted you to reset it so that it was correct on my teeth." The color in his face went pale as he reached and placed the dead heart on the countertop. As he said, "Oh my God." He moved over to me and opened my mouth, leaning forward and down. He was adjusting his line of sight until he could look at the roof of my mouth. Not saying another word, he pulled the beach towel off of my body, which was now completely drenching wet with my saliva and tears from top to bottom. He then hurled the towel into the wastebasket, then quietly, calmly said, "You can leave the hospital now." I sat in the dental chair for around 20 minutes as I gathered myself together. I felt horribly betrayed. Walking out into the dental office, I looked towards the front desk in pure wonderment as to how someone could sit outside the office surely hearing everything that had gone on inside and not done anything about it. To my amazement, the entire dental office was empty of anyone and everyone but the surgeon and me. The week before, my friend who had brought me to the hospital had come by to see me and asked what he could do that might help me. I had asked him to bring my car to the hospital parking lot. He did, and I had given him the keys to do so. As I walked outside, I had an idea where to look. I had the keys in my pocket because he had returned them the next day and said, "I parked your car out by the tree so that you can find it more easily." I remember him saying, "Go to the far end of the parking lot on the south side of the hospital." I did, and there I found my car. As I got in and started my car, I looked back towards the hospital, relieved that now finally, 4 weeks later, I was leaving. I never wanted to go back there again. No. Not ever. While driving through Fort Bragg, I drove my car toward my unit area. Not ready to face anyone with my face still wet from tears, I drove my car past my unit building, turned right, and headed down toward Yakin Avenue and on toward Wendy's hamburger restaurant. I had not eaten solid, real food in a month. I was going to treat myself to a Wendy's classic double bacon cheeseburger and fries with a large Coke. As I drove up into the Wendy's hamburger restaurant parking lot and parked my car, I looked into my review mirror. At the same time, I wiped my eyes with an old dirty t-shirt that was lying on the front seat. Then I got out and walked in and onto the bathroom. Under the light, while washing my hands, I looked into the mirror and could see that my eyes were bloodshot and my face was a grayish pale. Bending over, I cupped my hands and filled them with water, then splashed the water onto my face. Reaching, I grabbed the paper napkins on the wall dispenser and wiped my face dry. Once out at the front counter and the register, I ordered my Wendy's double classic bacon cheeseburger with fries and a large Coke. After I paid for and received my tray of food, I walked out into the dining area and sat at an empty table for 4. It was over by the glass windows on the west side. This way I could watch my car as it sat in the parking lot. As I sat there and reached to pick up my classic cheeseburger, I noticed in my peripheral vision the people sitting in the dining area were all looking at me as if I was some kind of a dope-crazed drug fiend. They seemed wary of my presence. As I put the cheeseburger toward my mouth and strained to open it wide enough, I was only able to get my mouth open, 3/4 the distance necessary to take a full bite of that double cheeseburger. As my eyes filled with tears, my thought process clicked. Inside my mind, a two-sided conversation was starting. One side of me would ask a question or make a declaration. The other side would decide the answer to the question, even to agree or disagree with the statement. It sounded like myself inside myself. I think you call this stewing over the event, as I had no means of venting this overwhelming psychological tragedy. It was as if I were multitasking inside my mind. I had lost it, temporary insanity. Another personality had evolved. It was at that moment that my 100% service-connected PTSD had begun, permanently altering my thought processes. To the extent, I was a professional soldier at work. After work, and on weekends, I was someone else. Same name, different personality. Well, he had done it. He had broken the special forces, trained soldier. It took him 4 weeks, millions of units of penicillin burning their way throughout my veins, and 3.5 hours of torture with a device called a dead heart to do it. The true technical name of this device is Dechert mouth gag. Spelled Dechert mouth gag. I'd soon be promoted to the rank of a Sergeant E5 and placed into a leadership position within an airborne infantry squad. Much more experience than my peers, but with a whispering discussion continually affecting my judgment and always coming forward during periods of extreme stress. My life continued and compounded this PTSD with experiences in a pre-war and then in 2 wars on 2 different continents, half a world apart, which you will experience along with me from time to time. The day I reported back to work at my unit, the battalion XO that I was assigned to drive for asked me if I was given a medical profile when I left the hospital. I replied, "No." Then I tried to explain what had taken place with the dead heart. Looking me in the eye, he said, "Then you're ready to get back to work?" I replied, "Yes, sir." My thought process was not motivated by fear but by my desire to respond in the correct manner to the problems before me. I would think about every little thing that happened, considering each alternative, but ultimately the answers didn't come from logical analysis. There were just too many variables. Each time I have claimed this event to the Veterans Administration, they say that my records show that I had an abscessed tooth and to drop it. Tell me, what does that have to do with being tortured with a device called a dead heart when I had committed no crime? It does not matter if it was an unfortunate event or not. My claim is not about the tooth. It is about the tragically unfortunate event with the dead heart, which is the root of my PTSD problem. A split personality. Everything else has grown from that day. Special note. Before I had written this down, I had gone through life trying to find the person I used to be. I couldn't do it. I'm wondering now if writing this down and putting it out there for others to know about will help me. Funny thing though, all these years later, I still have that tooth, and it has never given me any problems. Now you have a wide open perspective, and you are with me. I, in no way, want government-run healthcare. No, not ever.